This morning. And Lauren Leader, your new piece for The Hill crystallized another really important aspect of this race. It's entitled, "It's the Women, Stupid." And you write in part, quote, "The narrative in these midterms, as in so many recent elections, has been reductive, grouping women into overly simplistic categories. Think soccer moms, security moms, etc. Women are more complex than that." The Supreme Court's Dobbs v. Jackson decision drove a voter registration surge and motivation to turn out among a coalition of women that Democrats needed and that made a huge difference in the election. Many of us who work on women's political participation called it correctly. We knew that the early vote count and polls that focused on them all pointed to abortion as a high motivator. And I think in the days leading up to the election, especially a lot of analysts looking at the polls, really kind of fell away from that and thought, no, what is it that's bugging people? It's crime. They're not talking about abortion. And you stayed true because you know what women are thinking walking into the voting booth.
Well, and I think when you have polls that, like the Wall Street Journal poll that we talked about on Election Day, which ultimately was 150 women in their poll, I mean, these were not reliable. And I think those of us who follow this closely knew there was no way that women were swinging 15 points away from where they've been for the last 6 months on these issues in the last week before the election. It just defied logic. It didn't make any sense. And in fact, that turned out to be true. And I think the economy, clearly people care about the economy, but, you know, women are capable of caring about more than one thing. We're complex people, as we all are, and these very reductive polls that sort of just listed these top issues and thought women were going to vote exclusively on that were just wrong. They'd been telling us all summer, they'd been telling us all year, this was an important election for them, that the Dobbs decision was galvanizing, that it was driving them to the polls. It was a reason they were turning out. That was true for Democratic women, independent women. It was super true for the younger women, as John Della Volpe said. I mean, that surge in voter registration this summer of young women was transformative. Dobbs rewrote the political landscape.
And, you know, if you look at the state of Michigan, as you write about, I mean, they took back the state house. They took back the legislature there for the first time in 40, 50 years or something like that. Abortion was on the ballot. It was literally, it was a measure on the ballot to vote. And I think if you talk to Alyssa Slotkin and Hillary Scholten and Governor Whitmer, she ran up a big margin. That abortion initiative had a lot to do with it.
Hugely. Whitmer won like 75% of the female vote. I mean, it wasn't even close. And I think that's what you're seeing, what you saw across the country. And this coalition of women, the fact is, I think we talk so much about political divides in this country. The truth is they're really gender divides. The Republican Party has become increasingly white and male. The Democratic Party has become increasingly female. And women are the majority of the electorate. They've turned every election since 1980. They're more likely to show up. They turned this election, too.
I think it's fair to say that, you know, women stepped up, as they often do, in cases like this. But especially, you know, they're sensible. They don't like insurrections. They don't like people crawling all over the Capitol, defecating on it, beating up people, breaking windows. It's not something they want to be involved with. And secondly, they don't like their rights taken away. And I would argue that a lot of men feel that way as well, whether it's, you know, not supporting the rule of law, but also supporting the women in their lives to have rights.
I love that story Maggie Hassan told this morning about the door she knocked on where they, you know, the older gentleman pulls out his granddaughter and says, "I'm voting for her." And I think that's exactly right. It was a beautiful illustration of that. And, you know, I think that we said it all summer. Dobbs was this galvanizing issue. And you're right about the sort of moderate candidates. We saw that across the country. Independent women are so vital to the Democratic coalition. And those are the women who really turned away from the extremes. I think they're going to stay away from the extremes. I think this is a long-term trend, as Nancy Pelosi said. And we should listen to Pelosi. She's usually right. America is fundamentally a center-left country. And that's right.
Lauren Leader, as always, thank you so much for coming on.
Lauren.
Great to have you. And coming up on Morning Joe.